Hi folks, thanks for joining me again to go through this this demo. Essentially what we're looking at here is how we can build a calendar control in Canvas Power Apps. For this case, we're looking at something which can schedule an activity in Azure Data Factory, but we won't touch on that a bit too much. We'll purely look at the idea around creating essentially a booking and then linking that through the calendar control. So what we can see on here, we've got several dates in our calendar control. This has been created so we can see what day it starts on, so that then maps up with the day name. We can then select individual months by choosing the arrows at the top there, so we can go to the next month or the previous month. And additionally, within the actual control itself, we can see, let's say on the 10th, there's a red line there indicating there may be something that's happening on that day. By selecting that, I can then see the activities which are happening in that day. Now for this demo, the focus will be on the control itself, less about the functionality that you've got beneath it. That's something we can touch on a later topic, but really we'll be going through our key steps of how do we get to this point, how do we get started, and also some of the variables that we can pull out the back of this. So if you do want to build this functionality at the bottom, it's easy enough to go ahead and do that. What I may do later on is run you through how that looks on the actual application itself, just so you can see what the code looks like behind the scenes. So to get started with this sort of stuff, first thing I'm going to do is just go to my development environment, and inside of here I can create a new app. What we're looking to do here is create a blank app. Now there's a few different options we can choose from here. We can do it based on Dataverse. We can select our table and it'll try and build something off the back of that. We can go off and use Power Pages if you want to build a website. In our case, we're going to look at a blank Canvas app. So if I click create there, and the name of this, we were looking at a calendar, so we'll call this calendar demo for video. I can always go in and remove that later on. Now in terms of formatting, we've got two options here. We can either go with tablet or phone. For my case, I'm going to go with a phone layout. But again, there's no reason why you can't go to tablets, and there'll be newer ones in here at some point. So if I create that, the first thing it's going to do is go away and get all my different components ready. And it's going to take me into our studio view. So we can see here we have our main canvas in the center here, and on the left you can see that we have essentially the screen, the tree view, and we're doing some bits and pieces with that momentarily. Now I'm just going to quickly pull this example up onto my other screen, so I've got a reference. So the very first thing we want to do on here, really, I always like to just name a page. One thing a lot of people forget to do is name things correctly, not necessarily correctly, but in a way which, one, makes sense, two, if you've got things like screen readers, that they're picked up. So I can come onto here, double click my screen, and I'm just going to call that calendar. The next thing we want to do is start understanding how we're actually going to create this visualization, this control. Now for our other application, we had a couple of things that we were looking at. So if I pull this back onto the main screen, we actually have an app and an start property. And what this means is, as the app starts, it's going to go away and trigger a couple of these functions. Now the first one we have is our theme. I'm going to copy this across. I'm going to talk about that in a bit more detail in a moment. But the key ones we're looking at really are the month start, the end of month, the current month, current date, selected date, and down here we've got something called first date in view, and I'll walk through those in a bit more detail. So the first one we're looking at is get month start. The purpose behind this is we're looking to identify what's the start of the month in terms of what is our current month and what's the start of that current month. And what we're doing here is we're essentially saying, right, we want to take our date, and what we can do is actually dynamically pull the year from the current date, so 2022. We can then look at the month, so in this case the 11th, or the 11th month, and then from there we can just put a 1. And what that's going to do is set that to be the 1st of November 2022. So we can copy that straight over. The end of the month is slightly trickier. So the thing to consider here is, let's say you have January, February, March, April, May, those are your months there. Each one will have a slightly different number of days, and as you know, 30, 31, 28, so on. And actually doing basic arithmetic with this doesn't really work. We can never say we're going to have 30 days onto it. But what we can do is if we add an additional month onto our date or onto our month start, looking at that previous value, if we had today's date, which is the 15th of November at the time of recording, and we looked at the month start, which would be the 1st of November, if we add a month onto that, that's going to give us the 1st of December. And if we minus 1 day, that will knock us back into November. So that way, even if we do have an odd number of months, the logic within Power Apps will pick that up for us. So that's how I'll get the month end there. Now get current month. This is what we're using for some of our functions in the actual app itself. So when we're trying to default back to a current month or whatever else, we declare that right now. Likewise for things like current date and selected date. For now, we're just going to use the get start of month and get the end of month. So I can just copy those over. And if I pop that back over to the side. So on our app start, we can go to on start and inside of here, add in those functions. Very quick summary, your date is creating a date rather than trying to do it from a string. We're passing the year, month and day. Our month end is just doing a standard date add function where we're adding a month onto our month start and then subtracting a day. The next thing we want to do is get the first date in view. Now I'll copy this over. And what this is looking to do is it's doing our month start, deducting the weekday from that month start. And what that should do is basically deduct a certain number of days. So when it comes to our calendar view later on, it will take the value from that calendar view and give us the correct date. Now, you're going to have to hold on for a bit before we get to that, before you can actually see that. But this is something we need to really pull in and really need to generate. Otherwise, when we come to visualize our calendar later on, it won't work. Previously, what we've done is we've looked at generating a time series. So we may have looked at creating a list of dates from our start date to our end date. But the thing is that won't work. And the reason being is if we go back to our calendar visualization, if we had, let's say, our month start and our month end, we wouldn't be able to then match up the days at the top. So we need to look at the first date in view, which in this case is going to be the in this case it's the 30th of October there. So that's why we need that calculation. So it's going to give us a bit of breathing space at the start, a bit of breathing space at the end, and allow us to map in those day names later on. So once they're in place, what we can do is we can run that. We can run that on starts. So by doing that, we can go click the 3 dots there, run on start, and what we'll have. If I just close out that one and we have a look at our variables, we will now have the month start, which is the 1st of November, the month end, which is in this case going to be the 30th of November, and in this case the first date in view. It's saying that it's the 29th, but actually it's going to be the 30th because we're going to add a value onto it later on. The next thing we need to do is start looking at, right, how we're going to add this into our visualization. So if you think about it, on our calendar view, we're going to have to generate what we call a sequence, and that sequence is going to have 35 values in it. So I'll show you what I mean by that. So what we can do is we can add a vertical gallery, and by default it's going to try and pull some properties out for us. It's a massive pain, so we're just going to go to the blank gallery. From here, make sure you name it. So I usually call this month day view. But again, you can name that however else you want. We could call this calendar view or calendar items. Again, it's completely up to you. Just making sure it makes sense and it's saying exactly what we're displaying here. The next thing we need to look at is understanding basically what's our wrap count going to be. So what our wrap count means is essentially the number of columns that we're going to have here. So if we set the wrap count to be 7, we're then going to have basically 7 columns which we're going to generate here. And just to visualize this more, we're actually going to change the items in this gallery using the sequence function. So if we set that to be sequence 35, and we're going to start that from 1. And inside of here, we can then quickly insert our label, and that's going to give us our value. So our value for the item in that sequence. Adding on to this to make it look a little bit nicer, we can set things like the template size. So in our case, I'm going to set the template size to be, and if I just change that to be 66, and then with our number in the middle there, we can just center align that. You know, what we can also do is start setting things like the individual sort of height and width of some of those values. So one of the ones that I try to use is I might go with sort of like an 80 width, 66 height. So if I go with 80 width and 66 height, that's going to center align it in there for us. So now you can see that in our gallery we have a number of values across the top and down the side. And you should start seeing that really these are going to represent on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, depending on when the month starts and then a month, or when the week starts, or when the weekends, how you want to configure that. The next thing we need to start looking at is, right, we now have those values. We need to do a calculation in there to identify what's the actual date that we're trying to show. Now, looking at this previously, we've already generated a couple of things. So the first one being we have the month start. So we know the month is going to start on the 1st. We have the month end, so we have that there. And we also have the first dated view. Now, if you were to go into your calendar, and let me just clear those out. If you were to go into the calendar, what you'd see here is that we've got the 1st of November, that's starting on a Tuesday there. And obviously the first date in view, I mean, this calendar is slightly different. It is likely going to be the 30th if we're going to start on a Sunday. So obviously the value that we've got here for the 29th, that's not correct. So we're going to have to add a value. And what you can see is if we add 29 to the 1, we're going to get the 30th. So what our function is going to be, and if I select that value, is going to be this. So what we're doing here is, one, we're doing a date add, and we're doing a date add to our first date in the view, and we're going to add the value to it. So let's say the 29th, you can add one day to this, which gives the 30th, which is the first day that we want to show in our calendar. The reason why we have this text wraparound is if we didn't have that, and I can quickly show you that by commenting out these lines here. And let me just chuck those down there. We're going to have the entire date come through, and actually what that text function will allow us to do is just get rid of the rest of that day. So we're left with just the days there. Adding on to that, if we then want to add a couple of things such as the days in our calendar, if we copy this gallery, it's going to look a bit weird to start off with, but we're going to set the items, and we're going to use an inbuilt function called calendar.weekdays. So we're going to call that weekdays short and put in our brackets at the end. Looks like we have a minor issue here, and the likelihood being is it's due to this calculation that we have. So what we can do is we can do this item dot, and if we pull in the value, that's going to give us our Sunday to Saturday there. A couple of things I do is like to resize them. Make sure you turn off the scroll bars. And what that's going to allow you to do is just show you that calendar with those weekdays across the top. Again, a couple of things around formatting. You might want to set those to be bold. We can get rid of these other boxes now. There's other labels, and we can set that calendar to be at the top of the page. Now, the next thing we want to do is start looking at some of the formatting within this calendar. Now, we'll go on to selecting dates and then doing that sort of stuff in a moment and swapping over to different views. But right now, we're looking at these values here, so you can see that they are still visible. That's fine. Let's just quickly make those bold so they stand out. But actually, you know, it can be quite difficult if we're getting a user to look at this. You know, yes, it's obvious that we know that it's going to start on the 1st, but again, they're going to cast their eyes across and see the 30th. So what we can do is actually on the date value itself is set the color of the text. And if I just quickly get my formula for this, and we're going to change the color. We use a couple of different things here. So one being, I've got this thing called selected date. We can swap that out in a moment, but essentially what our formula does here is it's going to check things like, is the date currently selected? And if not, is it going to do something else? What we're going to do first is just get rid of that first statement. And I'll walk you through these different areas. So let's just check that. That's all fine. That's all fine. We're going to quickly get rid of the colouring there. Format that out. And let me walk you through this. So essentially what we're doing here, we're saying, right, if the month from the first date in view, so that's doing that calculation with trying to identify what the date is in the calendar item. Again, if you cast your mind back to our text, it's the same function. So it's that function there which you're trying to pick out what date is it trying to show within that cell. When we start looking at the colour, we're doing a calculation on that. So we're then saying, right, does the month of that date being visible match the month from our month start, which would be the 1st of November? If it doesn't, if it's not the same month, we're going to show a light grey. Otherwise, we're going to show black. And what that means is we can now visually see that we have our light grey, which is the previous month, the black, which is the current month, and then the light greys for the next month. What we can also do is build on this logic of being able to select a date within that view. So casting your mind back to the on start that we had in the other application, we had this idea of being able to select the current date or the selected date. In our case, we're just going to do selected date because the current date we can add in later on. And essentially all that's going to do is start declaring, if I paste this in, and let's just put a semicolon there, it's going to say the selected date is equal to today. We can then call that later on. And if we go back into our view, obviously we've updated the app on start now, so if we do one on start again, it will regenerate it for us. We can then look at that formula that we built previously, that we made some slight changes to. So looking back at the date calculation and specifically looking at the colour of the text, what we can then do is if I paste this in, just quickly change that to black, we'll talk about the theme later on. What this is now doing is now checking to say, right, does the first date in the view, etc., etc. item equal the selected date? And if it does, it's going to start doing some formatting for us. What that means is as it's going to start doing some calculations, identifying what's been selected, it's going to do some calculations and some date adds. That's going to set it to white, and the reason we're setting it to white because we're going to add a background to it later on. The rest of the time we're going to have that light grey and black. And then to really add onto this, to give this idea that you can then select an item, is we can add something like a shape, and from that shape we can then set things like visibility and so on. So what we'll do within our calendar, we're going to insert our shape, and in this case we're going to insert a circle. The circle itself, let's try and make sure that it's lined up correctly, so we'll give it a 60. Oh, 60. Let's make sure that's all aligned so we can't see any of our numbers. What I tend to also do with this as well is just send that to back, so our numbers show over the front, and I might just tweak that very slightly. So if we change our Y coordinate, and then we've got it down as a 4, so that should work for us. From there, that's going to cover off everything, so we then need to declare when it should and shouldn't be visible. So what we can do is on the actual object itself, change the visibility. So inside of here, we're now doing that check on the date. If that date equals the selected date, that's the current date in the view equals the selected date, then make it visible, otherwise hide it. And what you can see here, it then gives us that color over as a background to our shape or to our date. You might want to just change that slightly so it's better aligned. Looks like 11 is going to work for us. So from there, we now have this idea that we have a default selected date, which is today. We can then identify what that is by using formatting. The next thing we want to do is look at ways in which we can actually select an individual date and how we can change it. Now, the way we configure this, again, looking back at our view, we can see that some of these things we haven't actually updated the names correctly. So on this one, we're going to call this day name view. The label itself, we can just call day name. On the calendar view, we have the label, so we'll pop that down as date, and then we will put that down as selected option. What we can do is actually group these. So if we select one of these, hold Control, select the other one, we can click the three dots, go to group, and that's going to give us our group selection. So in my case, I'll call this selected month day, and we can actually add properties to that group. So now if I was to update that item, I can select it, and we're looking at being able to dynamically select the date in the view. So what we can do is have that selected, go to onSelect, and we can paste in these items. I'm just going to get rid of the last function. So essentially what we have here is we're saying we're going to update the selected date to the current items, or the current date that's been displayed in the view using our function there. So now if we give this a quick play, I can then select one of these, and then our colors will dynamically update. Adding to this, if we add a quick label, add that in underneath, let's center align that with the text. We can put that in as selected date. And what we might want to do is just quickly change that, so we can use the text function. So go dd, and what that'll do is just set it to be in the UK format for the date. So now if we go to play, we can then choose our date, and now that value is ready for us, so we can then go through and dynamically select a date within that calendar view, and that's going to allow us to use that later on with some of our filtering. So now if I quickly come into here, let's add a bit of a border. So we'll add a border around there, we'll add a border around there, and we'll quickly add a border around here as well. And what we can also do, and just add that underneath, and we can then set this to, let's say, be the selected month. So because we already have our month start function in there, we can paste that straight in, get it formatted nicely, chunk out into bold, and then what I might want to do is quickly go through and just change those borders to be a black. So there's really our key control, and that's what's going to influence other parts of the app. The only thing right now is this is only set to the current month. So whenever you go in, it'll update. If you wanted to then navigate between other months, we'll have to add in some more functionality. So the way we can navigate is we're going to add in a couple of arrows. So we'll go to an arrow to the left. I'll add that at the top there. We can just copy and paste that over, and we can just change it over on the right here. So we can do arrow to the right. Let's just chunk those up so they are ideally aligned to the top of the canvas. And in terms of our width, let's just make sure they're the same width. So we've got 74 there. Let's just add a quick 74 here and just bring them back in. We'll bring them in from the left and right slightly. So those are our arrows. Again, you might want to change some of the color formatting on there. So we can just do that by selecting them, change it to black. And then what we're looking to do is say, right, when you select an item, what's going to happen? So for our back button, we're going to have to do a couple of calculations. So the first one we're looking to do here is we want to get the start of the month, but this is going to be for the previous month. So because we're updating our month start variable by passing through the existing value of month start, which would be the 1st of November, we're deducting a month from that, which is going to give us the 1st of October, and then that'll be updated. Month end, that function is the same as the previous one because it's all relative to month start. So that's going to then go and get the first day of the next month, 1st of November, deduct 1, gives the last day, which would be the last day of October. The selected date, we dynamically update that, so it will always default to the first day of the month in the view. And the first date in the view is also going to update as well. The reason being that calendar is going to need to change. The next thing we need to do is on the next month, and as you can imagine, this is pretty much the exact same calculation. It's all relative again, but the month start is obviously adding a month onto the existing month start. So if you're looking at the 1st of November, as it is right now, that will then change to be the 1st of December. So now what we can do, if we give this a quick play, is actually if we go to the previous month, that's going to update. It looks as though we've got a minor issue there, so we might need to work with that in a moment. If we go to the next month, so there's a couple of things here, so we need to quickly go through. Let's just run that on start, check to figure out what's going on here. So if we look at some of our formulas, they should be okay. And it would just look like it was a slight change on the onStart function, so that's all working now. So just refreshing that is good to go. So right now we can see that we can swap between our previous months. You can see that the date and the month are updating below, and we can then go through to our next values all the way back to November. Now, if you cast your mind back, we also had this idea of being able to default back to, you know, where did I start from? And the way we can do that is using a couple of different options. So if I bring back the example we had earlier, you can see that we had a refresh button here, which goes through, defaults the month start back to today using today's values. The month end is the same, current month, selected date, again, all these sort of things are being set back to the current value. And actually, if you cast your mind back to what that would look like in our app, it would actually look like the on-app start here. So this is going through and taking this logic, and all we would need to do is we can copy and paste our icon to make sure we've got that correct theming. On here, we can set that to be, we've got a refresh or a reset. And then from here, we can take, for our app on start, we can copy all of this, go into here, paste that in. And we might want to do some quick tweaks with this. So I'm just going to change the height to be 70-70. Makes it look a bit nicer. So now when we play this and we go back to a previous month, if we reset the view, that's going to set it back to our current month. Likewise, if we go the other way, reset it back, goes back to November. And really, that's it for the calendar control. With the other example, we've added a lot more onto that. But if you just want something that's going to work and just do the job that you needed to do, this is a really good starting point. Other things that we've added onto it, and this is when I'll run you through this other application, is we have this idea of having this date range. So when you reset it, what it's going to do is it's going to actually have another property in here. And if I quickly go to this one, we'll have another property in here called view method, and we'll have a view method value of month and day. And what that'll do is that'll dynamically change this value. So if I quickly play this, I can click that to either set it to be the current date, or I can set it to be the entire month. So that's going to give you some flexibility there. The other thing we've done here as well is we've added this idea of a theme. And the way a theme works is if I just copy this and bring it through onto my other application. If I click onto that, for my on start, if I paste it in right at the start here, what that's going to do, and if I quickly run it again, is that's going to declare a bunch of colors for us. Really, it's just similar to any other variable, but it's just an object. So we can do app theme dot text color, app theme dot icon color. And what that'll then do is say, right, for this color, we can then bring this into the application. So a common example would be, let's say I chose my my circle that I've got within my view. I may want to say, well, actually, you know what, I don't really like the color of this. So I'm going to change the filler, and I can choose my app theme variable, which is declared right at the start, dot. And in this case, I'm going to put scheduled fill, that's the name of it. And you can see that then dynamically updates with the theme that's there. Likewise, if you had other components in the app, I don't know, maybe you wanted a, as per the other application, you know, we've got a couple of different ideas here where we have a sort of color banding on the left there based on different statuses. That color, we can do a just different fill on it, and we can do a switch, so we can say that if the status of this current record equals something, it's then going to pull through a certain color value. We could do something like app theme, and if I quickly undo that, so app theme dot And if I change that to be scheduled fill, what that's going to do is then give it the correct color. Likewise, on things like failure, we've got a red on there, success is green, cancelled is an orange. So that should give you a really good idea as to how you can quickly build a calendar control using a bit of code, but really not much, and a lot of it is repeatable and reusable. And likewise, if you want to create a component that you can reuse on other applications, this is a really good starting point there. Like I said, you've got that kill functionality of being able to swap between months, select individual dates, and likewise, if you need to then pull that date out later on because you want to filter a gallery to say everything in this gallery should equal a certain date or a date range, you can then choose that because it's a variable that's in memory there. Likewise, we always need to remember that we update these names, so we can do things like refresh calendar. We can choose that to be next month, previous month. With our labels, we can choose that month name, and we can call that day name. Looks like that's already in use, so if we change that to be selected date. So again, we're just making sure we're using all the correct naming standards there. It all makes sense. Individuals can see what they mean. Again, it also helps developers as well. If we can maintain that consistency throughout, it's going to be a lot easier to develop new functionality. And that's it. So hopefully you've enjoyed this, and it all makes sense. Once you're sorted with it, just save it, publish it, and you're good to go. Adding in things like data versus data sources, again, it's easy enough to do. You'd go onto the left here, choose your data source, and you can do your filtering. It's similar to what we've done on this application, whereas on the left here, we've got our calendar schedules, and all this gallery is looking at here is it's looking at the calendar schedules, doing some filtering on it based on month start, month end. So again, the next steps are pretty straightforward. But like I said, hope you enjoyed it. Give it a go, play around with it, see what works, see what doesn't. If you need any help with it, just give me a shout, and we can walk through it and figure out what the best next steps are. Great, so cool. Thanks for joining, and I'll hopefully catch you all later.